what you're being asked to do. So yeah, we're gonna do a stream on Brexit, on the European Union specifically anyway. So don't worry about having to predict exam questions in the future, because hopefully if you've you've done your studying, you've gone through these streams, you've gone through the lessons, you've gone through your lessons in the class, you should be okay. It's okay. So let's think about this exam question. Let's have a look at this exam question specifically. So I'm going to pin this exam question. To what extent have constitutional reforms introduced since 1997? So I've not included the marks for this. This could be a 25 mark question, or it could be a 40 mark question, I believe. It all depends on what exam board you're doing. But the actual essay itself is just a simple to what extent question. How often are you planning to do A-level politics live sessions? I'm going to try and do as many as possible. The aim is to try and go through every single chapter for A-level politics. So we're going to try and go through the Constitution, and then do Parliament, then do Prime Minister, move on to US comparative politics, do global politics for you EdXL students, also do political ideas as well for liberalism and conservatism and everything. So we're going to try and do all of them over the span of the next few months, okay, if that makes sense. So maybe like one a week for the next few months. Hopefully that makes sense. So what do people think about this exam question? What would you write? Think about some points that you would make when we're talking about this exam question. What have we got? It's quite a nice exam question, okay? It touches upon one of the things we've already talked about, constitutional reform, okay? What kind of things would you talk about to try and get those top marks in this exam question? Let me just put this here like so. Here we go. And now I've got a pen, so I can now write things. If we look at this, ready? I think it's that. There we go. So I can now write things. It's even better. So we can scribble some ideas down. What's everybody got? Let me think. Okay. Let's think about the things that we've got. So let's just think about the constitutional reforms that have been made since. I'm going to go out of this for a second. I'm just going to add a few new slides. So we can scribble all over these slides, and then we can do some planning for this exam question. Start from current slide. Okay, so let's begin. More democratic. Okay, so we've got a thingy here about more democratic. So more democratic. Let's think about the things for more democratic. Okay. So more democratic, Maya, you have put gives Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland more say on their issues. Exactly. So we could talk about devolution. Okay. So devolution, not only did devolution give people more say on their issues, but it also gives more access to elections. So more access to elections. Because if you're living in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, you can talk about a number of different elections that you can go. You can vote in general elections. You can vote in other elections. Okay. FO1 Act. I'm assuming you mean the Freedom of Information Act. Okay. Let's think about the Freedom of Information Act. So the Freedom of Information Act. You got to think. Okay. You can, as long as you can define what democratic means, which we hopefully can, democratia, or demos and kratia, power to the people, giving people more power and giving people more of a say in the political, in the political process. You could argue that the Freedom of Information Act is exactly an example of democratic, a more democratic institution, because it gives people more. So it gives people more power to hold government to account. Okay, so you're all making very good points. House of Lords Act. Josh, you have put Labour's motives for reform, decentralisation, modernisation, human rights. Exactly. So we've got a number of examples. Okay, so we've got Freedom of Information Act, we've got devolution. Let me write the other two as well. So we've got House of Lords Act. So House of Lords Act. Okay. You've put House of Lords Act 2014. I would argue that the best one would be the House of Lords Act 1999. Oopsie daisy. Let's just let this thing be really slow for a second. House of Lords Act 1999, because that arguably removed all those some of those hereditary peers. Okay. Okay. Now, we've got all these examples, so let's put also the Human Rights Act in. For some reason, this is being very slow. The Human Rights Act. Okay, let's stop this thing from being slow for a second. Anyway, you've got the Human Rights Act, you've got modernisation, okay, and the House of Lords Act. Now, you've listed them, okay, so we've got the information, we've listed the information. You have to now explain why. Okay, that's the key distinction that sets the C and B grade students out from the A star and the A level students. Okay, we need to explain why. So why does devolution make the UK more democratic? Well, I've put here that it gives more access to elections. Why does the Freedom of Information Act make the UK more democratic? Well, it gives more power to hold the government to account. So individual people have more power to hold government to account. Why does the House of Lords Act 1999 or the Human Rights Act of 1998? There we go, that's better. Why do these pieces of legislation give more power to this is ridiculous. This is broken. Okay. So why do these things give more power to these institutions? The reasons are you have to talk about why when we're making these exam questions. So we'll think about what else we got. So these are why these are more democratic. So let's talk about why they're not democratic. We have to have an argument as well. So we have to then take the information, explain why the pieces of evidence, point to the fact that they're more democratic, okay? And then you have to then look at the counter-arguments and assess the counter-arguments. So, Imran here has put, devolution is flawed because the devolved nations don't have full control due to the natures of... Yes, brilliant. So, we could say that devolution gives Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland more control, more access to elections. Exactly. But it doesn't do everything. Scotland can't control its foreign policy. Scotland doesn't have the power to control, for example, defence policy. How is it more democratic? If I'm a voter in Scotland and I vote for the Scottish Parliament, okay, I'm voting for them to make my laws. So why are they limited in their power to make laws? Okay, Maya, you've made a good point there. Also, think about this from the perspective of English voters. Why do Scottish voters get to have a say in the elections in Westminster, but we don't get to have a say in the elections at the Scottish Parliament? Because of the West Lothian question. So how is that democratic? Okay, Freedom of Information Act, it gives more power to hold government to account, but as I already mentioned when we talked about the Freedom of Information Act, the government can delay, the government can reject in some cases, okay? It's not as effective as we put in a Freedom of Information request and then we get all the information we need. Not necessarily the case. House of Lords. There is still a problem with the House of Lords as 92 are still hereditary. Exactly. If we go to this page where, as you can see, my trackpad decided to break. So that's supposed to say House of Lords Act 1999. That's supposed to say Human Rights Act 1998. It didn't exactly work very well. That's supposed to be an 8. Okay. The House of Lords Act 1999 made a very good contribution to reducing the hereditary peers. The kind of gross aspect of our system where if you are born into the right family, you are automatically a peer. But they didn't get rid of all of them. There's still 92 that are remaining. Okay? What else have we got? Human Rights Act is not superior to Parliament, as they are allowed to change the Constitution, which clashes with the Human Rights Act. Yeah. So, excuse me. So, the Human Rights Act is brilliant. It incorporates the ECHR into UK domestic law. Brilliant. That's a great thing. But Parliament is still sovereign. So Parliament can still just repeal the Human Rights Act. Okay? And they can repeal the Human Rights Act at the behest of, okay, their own government. So their own elected representatives, the electorate. So they could be voted in and they can still do what they want. Even though that's politically dangerous, legally they can do what they want. Was the MP expense standard due to the Freedom of Information request? I'm actually not quite sure about that. The expenses scandal. The expenses scandal. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. Okay, so the Freedom of Information Act played a key part in the triggering of the MP's expenses crisis. Requests made under the Act led to the collation of MP's expenses onto one record. While the drawn out process, there's a very good documentary about the expenses scandal. So yeah, it did actually. This is the abstract of a paper, I think, by the looks of it from here. So if you want to read the abstract, or if you want to purchase it yourself, go right ahead. So the expenses scandal was a very interesting one. So if we go back to the question real quick, so there are a few steps that we got to think about when we're doing these exam questions. Okay, so first question is, what are we being asked? We're being asked to identify some constitutional reforms since 1997, and asking, okay, did they add to democracy or did they take away from democracy? Okay, so step one is to just think about all the things you can talk about: devolution, Freedom of Information Act, House of Lords Act, Human Rights Act, Constitutional Reform Act, Supreme Court, okay, AV referendum, that's a good one, okay, Brexit was a great one, okay, nobody brought up Brexit. What do we think about Brexit with this? How would we argue, whereabouts would we argue when it comes to Brexit, when it comes to whether or not constitutional reforms were more democratic? What have we got? What have we got about Brexit? I'm going to try and write Brexit down on this, but it's been very glitchy for some reason. So, what have we got about Brexit? That's probably one that you have to talk about, arguably. So, how does Brexit... Okay. There are a couple of ways you can go about Brexit when arguing about whether or not it was more democratic. So we can put, on the one hand, we could also put, on the other hand. Okay? So what are the two arguments about Brexit? Can anybody think about this? Anybody got any idea at all about Brexit before we finish up? No? Okay. Well, on the one hand, Brexit was an incredibly democratic process. Okay? We have a 2016 referendum. Down here. Okay? Direct democracy, referendum. Brexit has made a constitutional change, creates considerable amounts of constitutional uncertainty, but also an opportunity to prove. An example of an elected dictatorship. Well, now there's a controversial example, a controversial opinion. So we have a 2016 referendum. Okay, that is a direct democracy, a direct democratic process. Okay, what was it? 17.4 million people voted for Brexit. Okay, and it eventually got done. So that's an example of a very democratic process. But on the other hand, being members of the EU, okay, gave us access to a certain amount of sovereignty and power on the European stage. So you got to think about it, because now we don't vote for MEPs. So no longer do we have MEPs. So, wow, this is glitching again. MEPs. Okay, no longer do we have MEPs. No longer does our voting in of a prime minister, for example, leads to becomes a figurehead in Europe in things like the Commission or the Council of Europe, for example. Oopsie daisy, what's happened? These are all things that are... We lost connection there for a second. Let me just see if we're back. Let's see. Okay, so I think we might be back now. Hopefully, anyway. Anyway. Oh, technology. Is it working? Are we back? Are we back up? Can anybody hear me? Yes. Okay, we're back. Okay, someone put a point in here as well. So Imran, you made a point about. Let me just turn myself off. There we go. So you made a point there about MEPs, that it's a good thing that we didn't vote for MEPs because UKIP dominated the MEPs and the Brexit Party eventually dominated the MEPs. That might be true, okay, and I'm sure that from a political perspective, most people won't agree with the with the politics of UKIP. But when it comes to asking a question about whether or not it was democratic, okay, even if we all in this room probably will disagree with the politics of UKIP and the politics of the Brexit Party, we can't deny the fact that that is still a democratic process. If everybody voted for MEPs, that's still a democratic process. So Brexit is a difficult one to think about. So we've got a number of points here on this, okay? On the whole, if you were to write a conclusion about this, we've talked about devolution, we've talked about the Human Rights Act, we've talked about Brexit. What would you come as a conclusion? Have constitutional reform since 1997 made the UK more democratic or not more democratic? Whereabouts would you land on it? I want to hear some opinions on the balance of all the evidence that we've talked about and all the things we've talked about in this stream. What would you think? And this is how we'll finish off by talking about what we would think and then see what happens. Oopsie daisy. Shouldn't be doing that. There we go. Because we have gone slightly over, I notice. So what would people think? I'm going to put this down here. What does everyone think? Before we finish. Anybody got any ideas? I would argue, personally, that if I was to make this argument, if I was to write this essay, I would argue that the constitutional reforms since 1997 have made the UK more democratic. I would argue on that side. I'd say, yeah, probably on balanced probability. I'd probably say that despite a number of issues with constitutional reforms made, that we have already raised, issues with devolution, issues with the House of Lords, issues with the Human Rights Act and parliamentary sovereignty. Despite these number of issues, I would argue that overall, definitely more democratic than before. Imran, definitely more democratic than before. Absolutely, I agree with you there as well. One thing that we didn't mention, really, really quick before the end, more democratic, Nora, yet. Okay, so people seem to be, on the whole, agreeing that more democratic. Okay. Agree with the question, but hasn't gone far enough. Okay, that's an interesting one. Arguably, it hasn't gone far enough. If we're talking politically, arguably it hasn't. Before we finish up, I just want to make a note that what we're going to do is we're going to do this kind of stream probably either every Tuesday night or every Monday night. We'll try and work out a best time to do this stream. It's going to be uploaded as a single video afterwards anyway, so if anybody wants to come back and re-watch this or revisit it, or if anybody, can't make the stream one particular evening, then they can come back and re-watch it if they want to. We're going to do every single chapter topic. So we've done the Constitution today. We've looked over the Constitution, revised the Constitution. In the next one, we'll revise Parliament. Okay, we'll talk about Parliament. And then we're just going to go through each one. I'm going to put a schedule up on the community page for the Learning Academy, so you have an idea of roughly when we're going to be doing each of these streams. Okay, so if you're, for example, somebody who struggles a lot with conservatism in political ideas, or socialism, or maybe US electoral systems, you will know when this stream is on. Okay, and then that's what we will do. For those who are also studying other A-levels, so if you are also studying A-level history, A-level politics, you're obviously studying politics, sorry, A-level history, A-level economics, A-level psychology, or A-level sociology, which are the other subjects that are being taught on the Learning Academy, let us know the kinds of things that, if you want an economics stream, if you want a history stream, a sociology stream, or whatever, just let us know if there's anything that you would want, because then we could do these streams for all the other different subjects. I hope everybody's enjoyed this stream, and I welcome everybody back to the next one. If there are any more questions, let us know in this chat box. We'll hang around for a little bit to see if there are any more questions in the chat box we can answer. But for now, I'd like to say thank you very much for engaging. That's the best bit. Exactly, that's the best bit for everybody, and I will see you